Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome costume designer Mica Kayde, who joins us to talk about their work on Longlegs. Mica will talk us through the creative process designing costumes for a horror film. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Mica. Hi, Mica. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about Longlegs, which had its released a couple of weeks ago now, and I think when you see stuff like there's a lot of chatter online about how people have really enjoyed it. I think the marketing has been extremely good because you have no idea what the film is about, but you're just drawn into it. As a head of department and someone who worked on it, how have you found the reaction to the film?
I mean, I've been so surprised. It was it was so fun to make, and it was like a really small crew. So I had no idea that it was going to be this big. And the marketing campaign has been insane. I mean, it's been amazing. It's wild to see it blow up so much, but I'm like so happy because it was just such a fun film.
When you work on projects, you never know what it's going to be like on the other end, just because you're so what's it called? You're so laser focused on creating what you're doing that I don't think you realize if something could be good or bad or not because you're working out of sync as well with shoot days, and you kind of don't know the context of scenes until you might see it at like the cast and crew screening or the premiere.
Totally. That's no, that's exactly right. I once we had like a cast and crew screening before, and we were all like, "Oh my gosh, we did it. Like look at this final sort of result of all of our hard work." It was really great to see.
And then plus as well, like I think especially like because I go on Twitter a lot, it's probably one of my main sort of vices at the moment, and probably get told off quite a lot from my wife about it. But so I'll apologize to her at some point. But with when you see stuff online as well, like what is your reaction to seeing people praise it and then also talk about coming up with like theories and sort of getting their interpretation to of the story?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty surreal people's interpretation of sort of yeah, the script and like, in this especially there's all the like mystery elements. So, I mean, I just like know it by the script and I know the script so well. So I'm like, oh, it's so sort of easy and like I know exactly what's going on. But it's nice to see everyone sort of like trying to dig further and sort of like question why they chose to do this or that. So that's like really fun to see. I've never worked on a project where everyone's kind of so into it in that way.
I guess that makes it more fun as well, because as you know, the sort of script inside out, it must be kind of funny where somebody might say, "Well, did you see that lampshade in minute 32?" Then it's like for you guys, it's just a lampshade.
Yeah, we're like, oh, that was added last minute, but there's a theory about it now.
Yeah, and I always think that's like it always enhances the film as well when you have people creating theories and questions because then you think it gets you thinking, being like, "Holy crap, is that true? Is that correct? Do I have to go back and check that out? No way, that can't be right, can it?"
Yeah, it kind of like distorts your memory of what it was like filming it for sure.
Oh yeah, that'd probably be worse as well because you think, is that true, or was it a case of just someone called up a buddy and asked for some random numbers to be written on like the page, or on the whiteboard that they have in like the FBI office.
Yeah, no, totally. It is like, whoa, it was a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Just want to, just to go back to the beginning, how did the project come about for yourself, and what made you want to take it on?
Yeah, I had a producer friend. He sort of emailed me and asked if I'd be interested in like interviewing for it. And then I looked up Oz and then I read the script and I was like, oh man, I have to work on this. This is so exciting. And then I had a phone call with him and he's just the best. Like we connected right away. I was working on my sister's farm, like harvesting potatoes that morning, and he asked what I was doing. I told him that, and he was like, "Oh, you're a jack of all trades. I'm excited to see what you do on this." And it was just, yeah, I was just so intrigued by the story and like his description of it. He's so into costumes, especially. So I just like loved the way he spoke about clothing and like texture and colors and like music. He like loves like putting music to different characters. So that just like it was him. He sold it for me for sure. He's just like an incredible director. And I was so happy that he chose me to be on the project with him.
When you have, it's like, I feel like whenever I speak to guests, it always feels like a weird sliding doors moment where you have that one friend who puts you forward or somebody that you worked with before, and then it just
Yeah.
all somehow clicks. And it's funny as well that the fact that you were harvesting potatoes, where, as I said, like jack of all trades, it must have been like, what can't this person do? It's which is, but then also it's like what a sort of like odd discussion at first to be like, because usually as creatives, maybe the stereotype is that you'd be somewhere in like a dark, dingy office drawing or creating or doing some sort of artistic thing. No, I was just getting potatoes so we can have it ready for Sunday roast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. It was like I was so nervous about the phone call. And then once I was up at 5 in the morning doing that, I was so incredibly relaxed when he called me. And I just straight up was like, I really want to work on this. And I'd never really done that before. I'd never been like very honest about like really wanting to do it, because you kind of try and be a little more relaxed and you're explaining sort of your ideas. But I was like, no, this is amazing. Like I really want to do it. And he was like, he called me like an hour later and he's like, yeah, let's do it.
I guess that probably helps as well. Like if you're slightly caught off guard, really, because if you're so relaxed doing what you're doing and then being not brutally honest, but very openly honest about like I want this. I don't want like I really want to do this, and then
Mm-hmm.
I guess that might catch them off guard as well because it's like you're sort of you're having a discussion about it, and obviously something went right considering they called back an hour later. Which
Yeah,
which is always like the probably the best sign and feeling. Or if they say straight away, like, yeah, you've got it from experience, is always just like, holy shit, I can't believe this is actually happening now.
totally. It's surreal when that happens and when you sort of click with someone instantly or they like understand your vision. Because yeah, having a creative vision and talking about it, you never know if people are gonna agree with it or not because it's art. So it's always, you never know who's gonna like it. But no, I was so happy that we just instantly knew that it was gonna be a good fit to work together. And it totally was.
You're mentioning earlier that Oz is really into his costumes and music. But as a costume designer, where do you begin in your research in a film like this? Because I think it's kind of best said like it is a period set horror film where you jump from the 70s and then 90s. Is there things that you specifically looked for when researching?
Yeah, I mean, I usually start by sort of reading the script and seeing what elements jump out at me. And then I do a ton of research on the time periods. And then I go sort of outside of those worlds. Like I did I looked a ton at the like the 70s, but then also like the 50s, the 60s, because like especially for the Longlegs character, we knew we were going to create like a uniform that he was going to wear sort of throughout the film, other than when he's in his workshop. So we wanted to see like, okay, who was he before this? So it was kind of like, and seeing Lee, like who was she? We got to see her as a kid and then grow up, and then Ruth as well. So we kind of, I sort of wanted to look at everything and like color tones too. Like it was a really collaborative thing. I love looking at like movies, but just also like photographs and drawings and sort of like it's like a plethora of imaginative sort of research and trying to figure out what works and then having discussions about that.
I always find like the research question is probably the most interesting for me
Yeah.
because it's the how do you get to the sort of final idea from looking up everything, and especially when you have like period things like something like this, because there's so much like because there's like such a big gap between the years and probably such a big gap in styles and like you have to look at what like maybe the social political landscape is of like have that Satanism stuff in the 70s to like the 90s where it's probably something completely different that's scaring kids those days. So then it's like what look are we going to create for that and how are we going to use color as well for our characters?
Yeah, no, totally. It is, I love to do the research on it, and I love to sort of like, I just looked before the interview, I looked at my like original email that I sent to Oz about my concept of long legs. And I was just like going off on like all of the things that I was like wanting to like put together to create this like character's look from like we wanted like a mix of like this weird Geppetto because he's a doll maker but we also wanted like glam rock because it's like he does this like weird sort of like rocker singing element that we were like trying to like put together and like how what does that mean for the costume, and then also just like classic workwear so from the 50s. So I was trying to like put all those elements together for him, but then that would work in the 70s, you know, all through to the 90s and like keep that and like what makes it sort of timeless, you know.
Do you find like as a costume designer because you're looking for that sort of timeless look, do you find it's
Yeah.
kind of I can imagine it's being a very difficult process because it's like how do you would you define timeless in terms of like look wise? But there's obviously certain things that are timeless. Like I guess the best example is like the Converse shoe. That's something that it's been around for so long and it's also associated with certain looks like Slash, for example. But how do you
Mm-hmm.
go about wanting to create a timeless look in film?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like a if I'm wanting to do, especially for like the long legs character, like this timeless element that can go throughout the ages, I think it was taking pieces of different times. So it was like his pants that we created, his whole look we built, and like it was like based on texture and based on different times. So like his pants were like based on a Wrangler from the 70s, but like a boot cut one. And then we like hand painted his cowboy boots, which we thought were sort of this like weird thing to like kind of put together with his Geppetto style. And then his vest was like a workwear vest, but it was also like matching with his pants, so sort of a suit. And then we had the like the flight jacket that was just this like gross skin like white leather with the shearling. So it was all sort of like it was like 70s mixed with like 60s and 50s vest, but then we had this flight jacket that was like a bomber style from the 80s. So it was all just like mixing and matching those elements and everything looking like he could have made it himself was sort of like the timeless portion of it, and then it all being in dirty white, it's all like all hand dyed. So I think yeah, the him being able to, if he made that whole look himself and thought this is perfect, I'm going to wear this forever, was that sort of timeless, not like putting him in one era.
Okay. I think, well, I find that very fascinating, the whole idea of it all, because I guess with like something that has that serial killer, like you kind of maybe want them to blend into sort of the background of people's lives. But
Yeah.
with Longlegs, it's like total opposite. And somebody had said it best was that he was like auditioning for Kiss, but forgot to sort of take all the white makeup off his whole clothes and body.
Oh my God, that's great. No,
Yeah.
totally. It's like he's like, yeah, like the silk scarves are the only thing that changed when he's wearing his uniform, which is so like that's such a glam rock thing, but it's also such a workwear thing to wear like a scarf in the 40s, but not a silk scarf, but like a bandana. So yeah, we wanted to like bring the elements in, but like he's still every time he's on screen, he's like performing. Like his character's like doing this like riddle performance. So it is, he's like, he is this sort of performer. So we wanted to like, he blends, like all of his colors blend, but he like definitely stands out wherever he is.
And even in like the snow, it feels like he's sort of just appearing on there.
Yeah.
Because of the
Oh
color as
man.
well. Like it's not that snow pure white. He's that the dirty sort of with the dyeing that you've done. It's like the dirty white.
Yeah. That was actually so amazing that it ended up being snowy because it wasn't snowy when we first got there. And then we had a huge snow dump, and then we were like, oh my gosh, this looks great. So I was really happy that it stood out with the snow, and like even like young Lee's like her red jacket that we built for the character, that also was like perfect in front of the snow. It was like the best thing that could have happened.
Oh wow, what a like happy accident, right? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not location, so I can't say for sure, but I definitely know when we went there the first day it wasn't snowy. And then all of a sudden there's like a blanket of snow, and then we did all the outdoor stuff. So that was like perfect if they planned that. And if they didn't, they like loved it.
Yeah. Well, again, magic of filmmaking if they didn't plan it and just how, yeah, done. Perfect.
Yeah. Against the White House too, which is like such a huge element in the storyline. So it was just, yeah, all the costumes looked so beautiful against that, I thought.
I guess as well, like in post, if they did the color grade where they slightly muted it as well,
Yeah.
which makes it look like a really cool sight to sort of set it in that time. But what I'd love to know as well, because you're doing you're dressing well, you're designing costumes for FBI agents where there's been so many iterations of FBI agents on TV, film. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did like a radio play, and we all have a preconceived notion of what an FBI agent would look like, especially with the jackets with the yellow writing on it. But when you went, but how did you go about creating the look for the FBI agents so that each person had that individual look and it wasn't just a bog standard office attire?
Yeah, we talked a lot about how we wanted Lee to be dressed and like what color tones we wanted her to be in. It was the color discussion was huge throughout, like with the DP and with the production designer and with Oz, because like the FBI like agency where we shot, they had different colored carpets. I don't know if that's like clear in the movie, but so we really wanted to make sure that Lee sort of stood out tonally, but was still in these like muted, earthy tones. She is the only woman other than Agent Browning who's there normally. There's like a couple others, but so she already like we didn't have to work very hard to make her stand out in the crowd of men. But we definitely wanted her to be quite relaxed in dressing. Like she wasn't trying to really impress anybody with how she was putting herself together. It was more for like she's going to work, so that's what she's going to wear. She knows she's going to wear a blouse and trousers. But we definitely wanted her to just be smartly dressed and casual enough that she felt like she could do her job. Like that was the most important thing for her. So we just like I worked on matching the colors so that she looked great, but also kind of washed out a bit. So was, you weren't as focused, like she wasn't presenting herself in this like look at me sort of way. It was more about like listening to what she had to say. Yeah, and like just putting her in chill shoes and loafers and like making it like this easy thing for her to like put on, and the texture too. Like we did so many textures with everybody because especially in the 90s as well, like we got to play around with corduroy and plaids and all that, which was so great and always looks so good on camera.
I think we see the corduroy with Blair Underwood's character at the end, which we'll get to because I think, as you said, it does look great on camera. But then also it's getting like the right sort of color as well. And I think like the grey really pops on camera and looks usually grey could be like a bit of a boring color to look at, but I think sometimes on camera it can really just be there in your face.
Yeah, I mean, for the Carter house, I mean, all the sets were so clearly marked with like the colors that we were using. And for that set, it was like very 90s new. So, like, you know, the creams and the whites, and sort of like not a ton of wear and tear to the house. Like, it was pretty blank. So, we wanted that to sort of go into the characters of Carter and his wife. So his like cable knit sweater that he wears, yeah, at the end it's gray, and I think she's either in blue or pink. I can't remember which one we put her in at the end. But yeah, they're just sort of this pastel blank, like next to Ruth and Lee, who are like Lee ends up being in that sort of creamy white that is mirrored with Longlegs. Like when they finally meet, it's almost like they're connected, wearing the same color. And then with yeah, with Ruth just being in this like wild weird concept nun outfit.
Basically cosplaying. But but even so with like the colors, because I always find sort of like use of colors is always fascinating as well, because as audience members, you're so used to seeing certain colors all the time. Like with red being a stop sign is always like a danger thing, or green being like it's okay to use. It's amazing how much color plays a part in the film and how much people will sort of look and like kind of look at it and dissect it at the same time, especially like when you use those pastel colors where it's like it creates that like a very warm and in this case like a well it's like a warm inviting feeling, but in this case it's kind of like you're creating that sort of fake like picket fence family feel to like what's happening and what's going to eventually happen at the end of the film.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it was so nice that color was such an important part in this whole film, and we talked about it constantly. And like I thought the production design was just so great. Like mixing like our wardrobe with them and like talking about it. It ended up looking so visually intriguing, and just yeah, with the silences too. I find like in horrors or thrillers, there's so much like silence builds, like you know, in the frame when like no one's really there, but there's maybe one person. So like that whole color story, like is with you know the lighting, the production design, the wardrobe, everything just like comes together when you see those moments.
When you have the first scene in the not the first scene, it's one of the earlier scenes in the 90s when they turn up to that suburban house and
Yeah,
it's like those are the sort of things that you notice as well is like just how because you mentioned it earlier as well, just how Lee's presented herself in a way of that she's there for business, she's not dressing up for someone, and it's also the practical use of being out in the field, and how like, you wouldn't be going door to door to people if you're wearing like 6 inch heels.
Yeah, totally. Her first look was like very strategic with she's in a brown, I think she's in a brown corduroy blazer and her red. That's the only time she wears red other than when she's a kid. And that was like we really wanted that to be the first sort of look, like with her with all this plastic, like all these white sort of walls and these shadows, and she's in this like red shirt, like knowing that the killer's there. It was kind of like that first scene of wanting to her to stand out, but also like she's showing that she has that sort of like background knowledge, like something's happening.
And it's great to sort of look as an opening scene to introduction to that world. I think what's great about the film as well is like you talked about the production design. There's a lot of it feels like there's a lot of wood in the film. So
Yeah.
sometimes, and which again, like you would think like if you're in sort of like a wooden barn or a wooden in the woods, like a cabin, during the day it always seems really nice and pleasant, but then at nighttime, those creaks sound even louder than they should do.
Oh, totally. I love the sequence in Lee's house, all the sequences, but that like first knock on the door that just goes after she's showered, and like there's that sort of like play of her running outside and Longlegs coming in and seeing his like silhouette outside, and like with all that warmth, and all of a sudden there's this like character like moving through it, and she's in this like cool purple sweater that seems like, she's in her like cozy wear, and all of a sudden it's this like jarring time for her. I love that. I love all the wood.
I think as well that scene is in a way it's just like don't go outside, and then the sound design as
Yeah.
well, where you just hear the creak just a little bit there, and something's happening, and then the heavy breathing. It's just like, oh no, it's like is am I breathing heavily, or is it this screen? I don't know because I'm so wrapped up in the scene.
Yeah, that was great. I was so excited. When you're shooting it, you don't know, you don't have all the elements yet. And then when you see it, I was like, oh, this is great. I'm so happy.
What is that like though as a costume designer? Because you're there working within the pre-production and then shooting the film, but then because you don't get 100% of the context of the scene in terms of sound being added or uh, extra visual effects, what's that like seeing the final product, knowing being like, oh yeah, that was shoot day 26. Oh, okay, now I totally get what they wanted to go for.
Yeah, I mean, it's always so exciting. You can only control sort of like what you're in charge of. So I'm just trying to do the best I can do with like all of the information that I have. And like, when you're shooting, you might be on hour like 10, or you're kind of tired and you're waiting for the day to sort of be done. And then when you see it, you're like, oh, I'm so happy that like all these elements came together. Because it is like, it's nice to have that element of surprise at the end with the finished product, because you don't know what it's going to be, even if you think you do, because you've read so many iterations of the script and flushed out so many different ideas and worked with everyone. But when you see it really come together, it's really nice. And it's nice when you watch it and you're actually drawn into the story, whereas you're not just thinking about what happened that day, and like if you were rushing or like what was going on, and you're actually like in like deep into the story, and watching it like as an outsider, that's always means that it was good.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're watching the film, you're not thinking, oh, maybe their collar should have been slightly to the left, or maybe we
Yeah, I
should.
mean, I definitely still, I'll still have those. I'm like, oh damn it, I wish I did this. But honestly and truly, like in the on this one, I was really happy with everything. It was really great. There was a couple times where I was like, oh, I sewed that veil and like ran to set and like threw it on, and then that like looked so good. So I'll be like happy about that. But all in all, I thought everything looked really great. So I'm really happy about the result.
I think that's again magic of filmmaking, right? Um, and how what's it called? How like those last minute changes or just how things have come together and how you want how an actor will be wearing the costumes as well. Yeah, just I don't know. Sometimes it's very difficult to describe those sort of moments.
Totally. There's no way to know what happened behind the scenes. And even after you're done, I feel like all those memories wash away and you're just so happy about how it turned out.
Yeah, exactly. And what I'm also curious to know about, because I think you touched on it just a little bit earlier, and you're talking about Ruth's costumes. Ruth, who's Lee's mother. When we first meet her, she seems like a very vibrant person and very bright in what she's wearing. But as the film goes on, we kind of get into a world where well, she becomes a hoarder. So I guess in a way, you kind of get an idea, or not an idea, but you get a feeling that somebody's sort of like trapped in a cycle in their life that they can't sort of move away from. How did you go about creating costumes for Ruth? And again, color plays a part, but is there sort of a certain theme or I don't want to say political movement because it's not the right thing, but when we see her as like a hoarder, she has those sort of feels like the colors are very sort of from like a hippie era.
Yeah, totally. It was so exciting making her costumes because she was just such a different character than everyone else. She sort of goes through the biggest transition throughout the film. So we kind of broke it down into three parts. Like we have Ruth in the 70s, and then Ruth as a nun, and then Ruth in the 90s. Our first sort of like, I mean, the first thing that Oz told me is like, okay, so Ruth in the 70s is like the album like Tapestry by Carole King. So this is like the vibe that I'm wanting for her. So we did, she's like the single mom and she's a nurse. And we wanted to make sure, she's like this like strong, independent woman in the sense, and she's sort of caring for her kid. And Lee's also, as a kid, she's like into horses and like into sort of outdoor sort of thing. So it kind of like paints this picture of them. Yeah, it's more granola for sure in that way. And our hero sweater that we had made was this crocheted sweater with all those colors that you see her in. And like the main idea for Ruth was to have this like sweater that like takes her to the 90s, and we see like visually how she lost the life of of who she used to be. So we had both of these sweaters made, and then we like sun bleached it and broke it down for the 90s and made it like quite decrepit, as if like that was the moment when Longlegs moved in where she like couldn't move past anything. So that was sort of like a great thing that we loved to do for her character, because it really like showed her past and her, yeah, what she lost. And then making her, we also put her in this like yellow nightgown, which is the worst color on Alicia. So it just like on purpose to just completely take the life out of her. And it kind of shows with even with like the skin that it's just like she doesn't have hardly any color in her face, like wearing those tones. It just looks awful in like the greatest way. But her nun costumes were so fun. We, I mean, we were just like, we made three, and were a lot of those were inspired by like old um nurse outfits, like old nurse capes. That was like the end cape was like this like weird sort of like painting photo that I saw with like this cape that a nurse was wearing, that I really wanted to recreate. And but all of those looks we built And a lot of them also were inspired by like Sound of Music because I'm a huge Sound of Music fan. I love Julie Andrews. But those silhouettes, and we just kept doing more and more of them. Like I think we started with three, and I wanted to do these earthy tones, like, you know, step away from like the black and white because we had like a little bit more creative ability there. Like Oz was like, you can kind of do your own colors. We're not real nuns here. And then from there, he was like, okay, do more, do more. We're gonna do more. So I think we ended up with five different ones that it was just so much fun and making those habits as well. But yeah, I loved those looks. I loved her cape at the end and the buttons. I don't think you can see them in the movie, but they have white houses on them, which I loved. They're like a little Easter egg.
That's pretty clever though with the white houses. That's something I need to go back and have a look at. What I think is quite fascinating is this sort of how you can tell somebody's story through their costumes and how over time things would things would be changing and how you can tell that as well. And again, I know we the theme of this episode is color, and we're talking about the yellow in the yellow dressing gown,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not the best thing for the actor, but it's the best thing for the character. How do you go about sort of talking to actors during fittings to say, look, these are the colors we're going to go for? What do you think? And how do you get their input into your costume design?
Yeah, I always make mood boards for every character. And when I'm emailing the actor, I put my mood board in there and I do like a little description of like, or I'll give them a call, whatever sort of works best, and I'll tell them my vision, and you know, I'll show it to the director beforehand as well, so he's sort of on board. But then I'll invite for the collaboration process to make sure that we're on the same page. And I find like, you know, usually you'll connect because you're sort of like deciphering who this character is together. So you come to this sort of like happy medium of like what your vision is, and if they had like any other input, or if they didn't see it the way you saw it, then you can sort of like collaborate on that. But I think it's so great to talk about who the character is with them, and discover that, because Alicia, even with our original email, she said my worst color is yellow, like pale yellow. And so and I was like, oh, that's perfect. And then when we were trying on all the nightgowns, I was like, oh, this is the worst color. This is perfect. And she was like, oh yeah, this one's really great. But I always like make sure that they're completely comfortable in every decision that we make, because they have to sell it on camera and they have to be the ones like feeling themselves like the character in the clothes. So I think it's so important to make sure that everything we do is like so incredibly collaborative so that they can give their best performance, and I can sort of they can basically like sell what we're trying to like show the audience, and that comes from them being comfortable or uncomfortable, whatever they sort of decide is right for the character. But we definitely had like a lot of discussions about why we were doing something. But I find if you're able to explain yourself in the depth that we do, then like everyone's usually on board, because it's just exciting to make a character come to life.
Yes, and you always find those sort of stories of like, oh, the sort of use of color and or what my worst color is. I think in
Mm-hmm.
Vertigo, for example, I think I don't know how famous the story is, but I think Kim Novak hated grey, and there's a grey suit in there that the character has to wear, and it just works so well in the film that it's that sort of color, that grey works, even though she hates wearing it. And then the fact that you
Mm-hmm.
have this yellow that Alice that it doesn't work on Alice, but it's just like, have I got a pitch for you?
Yeah, no, totally. It's yeah, the color is such an integral part and visually. So I like to, especially yeah, especially in this film, it was so nice to discuss it and talk about it and sort of find those colors and show yeah, that shows their character development.
I think as well, it's like another, I guess in like we were talking about this off screen about horror and how many different sandboxes you can play in. But I think as well, like
Hmm.
when you're talking about color, it just again in my mind it starts all the clogs start moving about you could be doing something like a really dour subject or something uh supernatural or something grim, but how you litter the world and how you show what people are like, that it's not just subject matter that has to be dour. It's like how can we make everything look more visual interesting.
Totally. Yeah. It's I think it's so important. Even in when we did all the long legs layer stuff, we ended up putting him in all these like childlike colors, which I was so happy about. And I actually wish we saw more of it. But he was wearing these like women's knit light purple leggings with these like purple, like the color of Barney purple slippers that we like made hand stitched that day because we couldn't find the right slippers. So we like made these little slippers that he would have made, and he had this like red shirt on with a little like heart patch. So it was like you always see him in white, but then you saw him in these like really like he's a kid in like a toy shop, essentially, those colors. And you see him wearing the robe too, which is like these purples and blues. The when he goes into the shop, like yeah, he's basically like this kid playing when he's like making these dolls, which was a fun sort of like difference of him in his like uniform when he's presenting himself, and when he's like working, he's like this like fun these fun colors and these fun textures that you sort of like are really likable.
And it's funny you do mention when it's further on in the future and you have sort of long legs that when he stumbles into the store and he's wearing, I feel like he's just wearing pajamas. He's basically become a very lazy person and he's wearing his pajamas and dressing gown, but he's still his kooky self.
Yeah, totally. He's just like he's so focused on these dolls that he's just like, I gotta go get this one part, and I broke a forget what he breaks, but he needs to go and get it. And he's just jolly, jolly to be working on it. And sort of, I always wanted this like weird childlike element with that. And like yeah, like a house coat, like a kid would just leave the house in their pajamas because they're still playing and they just like need to leave for a second.
Exactly. I've got two more questions left. There's something that you touched upon earlier about production design and how you collaborate then regarding colors. What is your collaboration like with other departments? Because with Longlegs as well as a character, they are in that sort of white outfit, and then they also have a very distinct look in terms of like hair and makeup. But then also you probably have to think about the continuity of scenes as well. If there's been a shooting, that like your clothes might have a bit of blood on it from a shooting, for example. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how do you go about collaborating with each department and then trying to get and then sort of trying to get to the same sort of spot to all be working in tandem?
I mean, with this film, there was so much collaboration. Our office, like our costume design area, was right beside the production design area. And we both, like the production designer and I, put up all of these mood boards. For mine were for all the characters and all the colors. And I had like all these colors that I wanted to use for them. And then he had all of the locations and all the colors that he was going to do at the locations. So we would like take little trips to each other's areas to sort of cross match. And then when we were doing sort of presenting what the final results were of what we were going to do and what we're sort of locked down with. We did do like a walkthrough with the DP and with the director and all of us, and we just sort of like walked around to see and talk about all the colors, which doesn't always happen because it was such a small team. I think we were lucky to be able to do that and to collaborate so much. I think sometimes you can't have those discussions, there's just too much going on. But for this, it was so important that we got to do that, and we got to, I when I present like what everyone's going to wear, I put what I think everyone should wear in which scene, and then which color. I did even like a background of which color like they were going to be against, and then like a through line of like when everyone were getting bloody and all this stuff, so that we sort of all knew that that was happening. And that was so exciting. And I will send it to like hair and makeup, and we all sort of discussed it on this movie, which was so incredibly lovely. And like I'm so fortunate that we all kind of got to do that, because I think it really shows that we all discussed it in length.
I could imagine as well, like if someone having one idea, another person having another idea, and then being like, do you know what? I didn't think about that part, or I didn't think about this. But then also, as you're talking about, it's like the continuity side of like, oh, this scene that'll be pristine, but then the next scene there's going to be blood here and there, and then somebody will think, oh yeah, they might have a head wound, or they might be cut, or something like that. So we might need to take in consideration where that's going to be come from, or where did the blood come from, and how is that going to look on screen. Again, crazy to think some of the things that people will need to think of before you even start filming.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so helpful. Like right before we shoot, we do a huge production meeting, and then we go through with every head of department, and we sort of finalize our questions on that. And especially in any horror or action or anything where anyone's getting bloody and there's stunts, and there's, with this, I think we had to make 7 Longlegs outfits with like 3 jackets. So it was, yeah, there was like a lot of stunt work and a lot of blood. So we really had to discuss how much blood was going to be here and what's going to happen here, and try and sort of figure it out all together. But then you get on set and Oz will pour blood on the nun. And you're like, okay, she's okay, there's blood everywhere. That's great. But it's still, yeah, it was definitely thought out, but there's always the element of surprise when you're shooting.
Do you have a moment though, like when something like that happens, where you just like, not necessarily, maybe your heart sinks just a little bit when you're like, oh, that's not how much we could have anticipated, but let's just go with it. It's fine.
I think that's a constant. Like, okay, that's not what we discussed, but I'm happy that it's happening, and we're going to see what happens next. As long as it matches, then that's great.
Yeah, and I'm sure somebody will, go frame by frame and see, hang on a second, there's a speck
Yeah,
more here and a speck less here.
yeah, you always hope that no one does that. And hopefully, it usually always matches, but yeah, you're always shooting out of order. So when more blood gets on it than not, you're like frantically switching it out or like cleaning it and redoing it so it
Like,
matches.
I guess it's best to start off with a little bit and then build up from there. But sometimes these things aren't able to do that. Just to hit you up with my final question, what was your favorite costume to design?
Oh man. Honestly, I think my favorite costume was the uniform for Longlegs. I think it was the first one that I sketched out that we were gonna make the entire thing. And it was just so fun to like come to that concept of, the mix of the glam rock, the classic workwear, and the Geppetto sort of ness about it. And I loved discussing it with Oz, and like he was like, let's make it iconic. I was like, oh, okay, that's so easy to do. Let's do it.
No pressure.
But yeah, it was such a fun one to make and sort of bring all those textures together. And have my breakdown artist hand dye everything and pick out the buttons. It was a really fun look, and I loved the silk scarves, and I really enjoyed that. And even hand painting the cowboy boots. It was so fun because I feel like the whole team got to work on it and put their, it felt like we were little doll makers making it. So I think that was the most fun. But I absolutely loved making all the costumes. Everything was like a challenge, but everything was just, it ended up being fabulous.
Or in other words, iconic.
Yeah, I hope so. To me, it is, and that's all that matters.
I think, well, one, no pressure when somebody says, yeah, just make it iconic, because then it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. It probably
Yeah.
makes you probably have to stay up at night. But I guess the litmus test is when it comes to Halloween time, right? And how if people
Yeah.
dress up, then you're like, yeah, we've done it. Even if it's one person, you know you've done it.
There we go. Yeah, we'll see if that sort of pans out. I think that Oz like mentioned that. He's like, we'll see at Halloween. I was like, okay, we'll see. Maybe I'll just dress up like him and then we'll see.
I think that's cheating. That's very cheating
Yeah.
because then you're like you're fudging it. You're making it. It's like no,
No,
you can't make fetch happen.
no, you can't. I'll be waiting to see. I'm hopeful that I'm hopeful that little kids are going to be dressing up like a doll serial killer and their parents, everybody.
I imagine like a. Do you know what? Creepy but funny if they did like a Longlegs themed like family costume.
Yeah, there could be Longlegs, and then there could be Ruth, and then Lee, and then the kid could be a doll. That'd be really sweet.
Could be a dog. Could be Mini Lee. Yeah.
There's endless possibilities.
But I reckon, yeah, let's. I'm gonna be on the. I keep an eye out as well, just so that you could pass it on and be like, see, we, we did it.
Yeah, let me know in London if there's any Longlegs running around.
Probably be seeing me running away from it more than anything if they're
Yeah,
running around.
that's right.
Would be like, nope, nope. It's like, can I take a quick photo? Cool, thanks, bye.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so great.
Uh, Micah, thank you so much for your time today. Longlegs is still now in cinemas, so if you can catch it and go appreciate Micah and her team's work.
Thank you so much, Rob, for having me. This was an absolute joy.
Thank you. No, thank you, and thank you for your time. You take care and bye bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.